Stop me if you've heard this one before. A young white teenager named Ethan, who comes from a well-off suburban family, receives a gift from his father. He then takes that gift and promptly uses it to kill 4 people and maim others in a sudden act of carnage. The mass killing makes national news. A predictable debate emerges about how this could have been prevented, and of course people start asking about the teen killer's parents. Where the hell were they? This leads to Mr. and Mrs. Ethan having to skip town. The 2 fugitives become the subject of a massive manhunt, which eventually ends in them being located and brought back to stand trial. Now, I'm not talking about Ethan Crumbley. I'm talking about Ethan Couch. You remember, affluenza teen? And the similarities are more than just passing. Ethan Couch was a Texas teenager who was the son of a wealthy Texas family. His parents let him degenerate into a teenage alcoholic. He and some of his friends stole, that's right, stole beer from a Walmart. That was the night that he went on his little rampage. Now, Ethan Couch didn't steal that beer because he couldn't afford it. God knows his parents had enough money. And he didn't steal it because he didn't think that his parents would approve of him having it. He stole it because when you're in a society based on racial privilege, and it becomes clear that the recipients of that racial privilege are on code to preserve it at all costs, even if it kills them, then you understand they're not going to use those rules against you. They can't afford to. I guess having wealthy parents wasn't enough for Ethan Couch, so he went drunk driving with the beer that he stole, and he struck 4 pedestrians, killing all 4 of them. He also wound up injuring some of the people who were in the vehicle with him. Afterwards, Ethan Couch was arrested, but his time in the pokey didn't last long. He's classified as white, so the judge immediately gave him 10 years probation. 10 years probation for killing 4 people. They say everything's bigger in Texas, but apparently the prison sentences aren't, at least not if you're classified as white. Keep in mind, this guy killed 4 people with his vehicle. 4. So he was released to his parents. A lot of people were shocked. You would have thought that this teen punk having stolen some beer and getting himself drunk with it and killing 4 people with his truck would have made some judge think that at the very least Ethan Couch was ambivalent about obeying the law, but apparently that doesn't apply in Texas. So almost as soon as Couch was given probation, only a few days later, he was caught on video drinking with alcohol that was certainly given to him by his parents. That was a clear violation of his probation. And rather than face the music, Ethan Couch and his mother promptly fled not just the city or the state, but they fled the entire country. They fled to a resort in Puerto Vallarta, but their Mexican vacation didn't last long. They were eventually nabbed and brought back to the U.S., but that didn't mean anything. At the very least, Ethan Couch should have automatically gone straight to prison to serve his pitifully low 10-year sentence. But he didn't even have to serve that much time. You would think that having killed 4 people violated his probation, they'd throw the book at him. Instead, all they threw was a paltry 2 years at him, and he was released again. By the way, he's since been in trouble with his probation since then. But those didn't make the headlines because, let's face it, it's obvious that white privilege is going to be enough to make sure nothing happens to him. And that's the point. It's not money, it's whiteness. You have never heard of a black man who was allowed to do even one of the things that Ethan Couch did, let alone all 3, and still remain a free man. Bill Cosby went to prison for longer than Ethan Couch did, and Cosby didn't even break any laws. This isn't about money. Well, just last week we had yet another in a string of examples of how skin color trumps the law. But it didn't come out of nowhere. What we're seeing here going on now is the Rittenhouse effect. Underage suburban males whose families arm them, and then they go and commit some act of mass violence. A lot of these suburban males saw what Kyle Rittenhouse did, and they were only too eager to imitate him. And now, seeing how egregiously the court bent and wholesale ignored the law to engineer an acquittal for Rittenhouse, they feel like they have the full support of the society in a way that teen mass shooters hadn't before. Kyle Rittenhouse's acquittal was a seminal event. A teen mass shooter who was caught on video gunning people down and who was given huge support instead of condemnation. The media supported him, the politicians supported him, and even a couple of washed-up D-list celebrities did. So, what these teen mass shooter wannabes realized was you can kill people, and then you can be showered with support and praise and even money for it. Hell, you can be allowed to get away with it, and the society will make you a hero for it. You want to know why so many of these Scooter the Shooter types take their own lives after they commit a mass shooting? Because they're terrified to go to prison. But after Rittenhouse, they've become emboldened. They're getting the idea that maybe society will allow them to not go to prison. Letting a teen mass killer walk has backfired with horrifying results. Last Monday, Ethan Crumbley had been caught by a teacher using his cell phone to look for ammunition. Now, the school didn't suspend him or take any sort of disciplinary action against him. They instead asked his parents to come to the school so they could chat about it. Jennifer Crumbley thought that it was all a joke. Rather than reprimand her little psycho in training, she encouraged him, sending her son a text saying, "LOL, I'm not mad. You have to learn not to get caught." Really? You have to learn not to get caught? There's a green light from mom to commit murder if there ever was one. So the very next day, Tuesday the 30th, a teacher finds a note of drawing on Ethan Crumbley's desk depicting thoughts of murder. This is the second time in a row they've gotten something like this from him, and it was so disturbing that the teacher had to take him out of class and call his parents to the school again. Now the parents, they finished their little conference, and they promised the principal or whomever that they'd have a talk with Scooter Jr. Ethan left the meeting too. He went to the bathroom with his backpack, took the Christmas gift handgun he had gotten from his parents out of it, and immediately began shooting his classmates and anyone else that he could. Now, what doesn't get discussed much is that on November 27th, just 3 days before the slaughter, Ethan's mother made a post on social media showing the gun saying Mom and Son Day, testing out his new Xmas present. So she and Scooter the Shooter were out playing with his new toy. Sociopathology can be taught, you know. You can be socialized to be sociopathic. A society that coddles you, refuses to hold you to any standards, will inevitably condition you to believe that no one and nothing matters. A gun isn't a toy. It's bad enough putting a lethal weapon in the hands of a child, as the dominant society makes it its habit to do. Kids in general are not mature. A lot of them mature slowly, and they think that everything's a toy. But the problem of adolescent immaturity is greatly compounded tenfold if that child is in a society that makes excuses for everything they do, or ignores their wrongdoing consistently and instead uses the media to heap praise on the immature child, or makes the entitled child to think the world revolves around them. This child never grows up, they're never told no, nothing is ever their fault, and they never suffer any consequences. The society that does that singles out an entire class of individuals to be praised for their law-breaking rather than punished, to be immune from consequences rather than subject to them. That's a society that is breeding sociopaths. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that this happened right after the Rittenhouse verdict. The similarities are unmistakable. Rittenhouse's mother was the one who was primarily responsible for raising him and who encouraged his love of guns, just like Crumbley. Rittenhouse's mother is a right-wing lunatic who taught her murderous son that guns are actually tools of political expression. But as TBA masterfully broke down in his video just last night, the mother of Ethan Crumbley, in her open social media letter to Trump, said she was an LGBT supporter and a feminist who is in favor of abortion. But why would a gay rights-supporting, abortion-loving woman be writing a love letter to Trump in 2016, no less, years ago? Because white supremacy is not based on LGBT advocacy or abortion. White supremacy is based on ensuring the goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that are handed to those classified as white. And everything in Jennifer Crumbley's love letter to Trump praised him for making whiteness great again. She tried to conceal that she racially discriminates in her letter. She went into what was supposed to be thanking Trump for her right to bear arms because she's a realtor. When I read that, it sounded insane on its face. First of all, the only gun restrictions of any significance in this country have been in regards to assault rifles, not handguns. So unless she runs around with an AR-15 when she's doing an open house, it makes no sense to praise Trump for that. Does she routinely shoot people who she conducts house tours for? It's definitely not a personal protection issue because nobody's out there attacking realtors. I speak fluent white supremacists, so I know when they're trying to conceal a message in code, and I know what the code is. Because for most people, for her to link her status as a realtor to a Second Amendment rant makes absolutely no sense. It sounds like crazy Karen babble. That is, until you read the very next sentence, quote, allowing me to be protected if I show a home to someone with bad intentions. Now, first of all, Trump didn't say much of anything about the Second Amendment. Not even back in his first presidential campaign. His big thing was attacking black athletes and black public figures and pimping his border wall to gullible rubes like Jennifer Crumbley who were dumb enough to actually think it would ever happen. So for her in 2016 to laud Trump for his Second Amendment advocacy makes no sense because Trump almost never advocated for the Second Amendment. Trump's entire political platform came down to his position on race. Now keep in mind, this woman wrote this in November 2016, 5 years ago. Her job was as a realtor. So does anyone think that this woman was the only person on earth who didn't know that Donald Trump was also into real estate? Of course she knew, and that would have had special significance to her because she was in the same field. As a realtor, she would also know that Trump had been successfully sued in the 1970s for housing discrimination. You notice how she never brought up Trump's views on race, all the stuff she was praising Trump for. It's great that you're not a good public speaker. Oh, it's great that you beat the IRS. She didn't bring up anything about race. While she claimed herself not to be racist, she never said it's a good thing that you're colorblind. You never discriminate. Jennifer Crumbley knew exactly what she was saying. Her closest connection to Trump would not be on the Second Amendment. It would be on one of the two main things they have in common. They both work in real estate. The other thing they have in common is that they're both white. So her little paragraph about the Second Amendment, that had nothing to do with anything. She was simply using that reference as cover to say what she really wanted to say, which was about her business in real estate. She thanked him for allowing her to be protected if she showed a home to someone with bad intentions. Jennifer Crumbley posted this love letter to Trump in November 2016. The Orange Man wasn't even in office yet. He had only just been elected a week earlier. So why was she thanking him for his policy positions and all that he had done when it would still be 2 months before he even took office? Because she knows, as a fellow racist in real estate, that once Trump was in office, his Department of Housing and Urban Development would no longer be going after anyone for housing discrimination. That's what her message was really about. Thank you for protecting me when I discriminate against these black people who have intentions of moving into neighborhoods that I don't want them to be in. You see, the white supremacists are fighting a race war across every front. And race soldiers come in a number of different varieties and positions, not just the ones in the police department who ambush black motorists or pedestrians or black people in their own homes. You also have race soldiers like Jennifer Crumbley, who see themselves as holding the line against black people who think that they're going to live wherever they want to. She sees her job in the race war as being a civic warden, a prison guard making sure black people stay in their place, literally. So when Jennifer Crumbley commits housing discrimination, she appreciates knowing that she had a partner in crime in the White House. Obama's weak Housing and Urban Development Department gave very little oversight. Trump, however, would go a couple steps better than that. Not only would there be no oversight, but Trump would openly encourage housing discrimination. This is what Jennifer Crumbley was really thanking him for. And before anyone decides they want to argue with it, keep in mind, there are a number of these white supremacists who are a little more careful than the average. Clearly, she gave at least a little bit of forethought to what she might say, especially if anyone figured out that she was the one who posted this message. There's a few of them who are like that. They understand that when people say anything you post online, think of what would happen if everyone on earth knew it was you. There's some of them who actually think that far ahead. So she gave herself some rhetorical cover throughout the letter. As a realtor, Jennifer Crumbley knows housing discrimination is illegal and that she couldn't directly thank Trump for allowing that. She could expose herself to the possibility of facing fines, losing her license, or both. You should look up what the actual federal guidelines are regarding housing discrimination. You're not allowed to, even if people ask you, you're not allowed to tell them what the racial makeup of a neighborhood is. You're not allowed to even suggest things like, oh, you're Jewish, so this neighborhood happens to have a synagogue in the area. You can't even say anything like that. Those kind of things would expose you to violating the housing discrimination laws. That's how strict they are about it. That's how direct they are. So you got to be much more careful and crafty. And that's how you get somebody like Jennifer Crumbley, who decides in her letter she's going to say, oh, I have no problem with LGBT people and abortion. Yeah, because that happens to be part of the Fair Housing Act. You can't be discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation, so she wants to make sure she throws that in there. That's sprinkling sugar on crap. It's meant to give her cover when she starts spewing all of this foul garbage. But it shouldn't surprise anyone that this Jennifer Connelly woman is a proud denizen of MAGA land. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that white women surprisingly broke for Trump in much larger than expected numbers in 2016 and then did it again in 2020. This is part of the political discussion that never comes up because when it comes to social discourse in this society, the dominant society is never to be blamed. You can say black on black crime all day, but you can't say white on white crime. It's just crime. You can say black single mothers, but you can't say white single mothers. It's just single mothers. You can racialize discussions about black people, but with white people, it's never a racial discussion. White is treated as a tabula rasa normalcy. It's treated as the default, even in places where they're the numerical minority. This is how you can have white people saying, well, how come there's no White History Month? It's because this society, since its founding, has made white the default definition of history, culture, literature, society, all the major arenas of human activity. It's redundant to say white American because the men who founded the country wrote into the Constitution that black people are only 3/5 human. It's been established from the very beginning that human means white. It's redundant to say white history because the only history the country acknowledges is what white people have been involved in. The politicians say our schools or our children, but only when they're in front of a predominantly white audience. And everyone understands they're not talking about black people. On the rare occasions that these white political figures go to black voters, they never say our schools when they're talking about us. They make sure to say your schools. Or at the very least, they just say schools in general, but they make it clear we're not in the same boat together. When talking to black people, these white politicians make it clear that this isn't personal for them. The politicians and the academics were the ones who made it a point to draw a racial distinction between black people and everyone else, but I digress. Back to the felonious Jennifer Crumbley. Her adoration for Trump shouldn't surprise anyone at all. She wasn't alone. This is something the black feminists simply refuse to understand. These white supremacist females will run their mouths about the sisterhood all day, but that crap starts and stops with them. When they talk about the sisterhood, it's white women they're talking about. But when white men tell them to knock it off, they do it. That's how you get a self-described LGBT abortion-supporting white woman like Jennifer Crumbley to go buy a gun for her underage son and to thank Trump for assuring her that the housing discrimination laws are going to take a 4-year holiday. And sure, Trump admitted to grabbing white women by the crotch. He admitted to sexually assaulting and abusing white women. But not only did Jennifer Crumbley say she wasn't offended, she said she was, quote, sick of getting effed in the A and would rather be grabbed by the P. Now, that could not be any clearer, a declaration that as far as she's concerned, white primacy means more to her than anything. Even her own personal safety. You can violate her sexually and, well, as long as white supremacy is being maintained, she'll overlook that. That explains a great deal of what we see from the behavior of these white supremacist females out here now, doesn't it? This is the mind of the person who raised Ethan Crumbley. He came by his sociopathic tendencies honestly. He was coddled and pampered by society and sociopathologically encouraged and enabled at home. But it wasn't just his parents. Racism is systemic, and so is white privilege, which is part of it. We don't have to ask why didn't anyone see the warning signs with Ethan Crumbley. The school themselves admitted they'd caught him twice, and the school did nothing to protect their own students. Why does this keep happening over and over and over again? Were there an epidemic of black students coming to school, blowing away a half-dozen classmates at a pop on a near-weekly basis? There would be laws, there would be surveillance, there would be gun-toting thugs all over the place with badges. Civil liberties be damned. But we already know it doesn't get that far because black students are suspended, expelled, or put into special ed classes merely because some racist in the school system says they did something or failed to do something. We've had black kindergartners handcuffed by white cops because teachers said that they wouldn't stop crying. Black teenage girls assaulted and violently dragged out of the school by thugs with badges because the teachers said they were defying them. Black teens arrested and given sexual misconduct charges for exchanging sexually explicit text messages with white girls who also sent sexually explicit messages to them, but that doesn't get mentioned. Black children are monitored and constantly under threat from the schools and the society. The reason you don't see black children doing this is because they're not allowed to, and that's the discussion that the society dares not have. And that brings us to another aspect of the Rittenhouse effect, because as I documented for you in my video 7 Lies Rittenhouse and his supporters told, Kyle Rittenhouse had been caught on video beating a teenage girl. Not only did he not get arrested for this crime, he didn't even get in trouble. Nothing happened to him. The white media never showed the video. They didn't even talk about it. You have video of a violent mass killer beating a teenage girl mere weeks before he goes on a rampage, and you don't show it? None of the white media outlets showed it. They show video of the occasional black kids who get into an after-school fight all the time. But none of those kids killed anyone. And yet the white media treats that like it's big news. But you have a white male from the suburbs who beats up a teenage girl, then goes on a shooting rampage, and the white media won't show the video and won't even discuss it. And it wasn't just false news who engaged in this media embargo. You had MSNBC, CNN, the 3 major networks, the newspapers, all of them were on code. We're not talking about that. We don't want anyone to think that there were any warning signs. We're trying to protect this guy. They were determined not to treat Kyle Rittenhouse as what he is, a mass shooter. They didn't chronicle this shooter's history of violence leading up to the massacre. Because the people Kyle Rittenhouse killed were supporting black people's right to live, so the white media all got on code across the board. Phony labels like liberal or conservative fell away in moments like that, and they all show that they have the exact same racial policy where black people are concerned. White privilege must be maintained at all costs. And the primary objective of white supremacy is to use violence, either by those with badges or without, to make sure that black people are kept in line, kept intimidated. Not just black people, but any white people, any non-black people who call themselves getting off code, well, you got to make sure they understand they're not going to be protected. Their white privilege is revoked. Oh, you call yourself actually disagreeing with white supremacy just because you've got white skin? Hell, you'll find yourself becoming a target too. And everyone understood that that was exactly what the Rittenhouse trial was about. And now, predictably, we're seeing more teenage suburban shooters who have correctly interpreted that they have been given the green light to engage in the same kind of mass killings. Previously, these punks did these things because in their minds they would be remembered. Sure, they'd be hated, but as they saw it, they were never going to accomplish anything in their pathetic lives anyway, and everybody already hated them, so why not go out in a blaze of infamy? This was why Elliot Rodgers went on his rampage. He felt that being half white meant that he was better than black people. In one of his ranting video screeds, he complained and whined that it simply wasn't fair that he had a BMW and his father worked in the movie business, and yet whenever poor Elliot went to parties, he would get himself kicked out, but not before he saw the white girls clinging on to the black men like they were something good to eat, while he was always ignored. And that seemed to be something that absolutely ate him alive. He simply could not accept the fact that money couldn't buy him manhood, and that the females, even the white ones, could clearly tell the difference. This is why you see so many of these angry suburbanite males running around with guns. It's the reason that gun culture is so important to them, and they're so enraptured with it, because they feel inherently deficient. They feel inherently impotent. They feel like a bunch of eunuchs, they're helpless to do anything about it, and worst of all, everyone can see it. Females, even of their own group, don't find them attractive. Men of any group don't respect them. If it wasn't for the fact that these guys control so much of the economy, nobody would give a rip what they have to say. That's why whiteness and the goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that the society has given to those classified as white receive, that's why it's so important to them. It means everything. This is what's at the core of so many of these mass shooters. Just look at Kyle Rittenhouse. That flabby, birth defect-looking hamster-faced punk, he thought that posing with an assault rifle made him look tough. Ethan Crumbley's excuse was that he was being bullied. So they bought their masculinity in the form of a firearm. And this attempt to use some material item as a substitute for their masculinity that they clearly lack, that applies to Ethan Couch too. Affluenza Boy felt that being a hard-drinking speed freak would make him seem more manly to people. He committed his mass killing with his truck, and while we don't know what his crimes were before he killed those 4 people, we do know that he committed a parole violation and illegally fled the country afterwards. So are we so naive as to think that Ethan Couch wasn't committing crimes before the mass murder? Besides, you had a bunch of judges who showed that they would cover up for him for a mass murder repeatedly. You think they wouldn't cover up lesser crimes beforehand, or that they already weren't doing it? This is the result of systemic white privilege. The people who benefit from it are powerless to stop it when it harms them, because it's an all-or-nothing proposition. Either you believe in white supremacy or you don't. And that means you got to sign on to all of it. Oh, you want to make sure that white supremacy hands you every crumb of your daily bread? Well, you have to also accept every drop of blood that it spills from you, too. It's a zero-sum game. And sure, the white media will say black-on-black crime all day, and they'll encourage people all over the society to do so, but nobody ever says white school shooter. They don't dare say those words, because that would mean you have to focus on those classified as white, and they made up their minds hundreds of years ago that's not going to happen. They're caught on the horns of a dilemma. They want to save their children, but they need white privilege. And to take the steps necessary to stop these shootings would require the beginning of a culture of consequence for white privilege. How can they preserve white privilege and dismantle it at the same time? Answer, they can't, so they won't. Black people simply need to get over this idea that the dominant society thinks the same way we do, are motivated the same way, see the world the same way that we do. They don't. Survival is at the top of our list of priorities. We're not really willing to die for anything. And the white supremacists know that. That's why when they come at us, they show up with the tanks and guns. It's to confront us with the prospect of death. Because we've shown on too many occasions that we'll readily back down. You make it where it's going to cost black folks their lives, they'll immediately say, that's a price too high. The white supremacists, on the other hand, they don't value their survival first. They value their power first. And the ability to harm black people with impunity is a huge part of that. They understand the laws weren't written to punish them, they were written to punish us. White supremacy is a system of 110% corruption, and no system of corruption can possibly sustain itself without the use of violence. There must be violence involved. People do not readily accept and enjoy corruption. They hate it. They want to see it gone. So they have to be forced to accept it. They have to be forced to live with it. You got to make it clear there will be violent consequences if you call yourself trying to do something about this corruption. And that's what white supremacy is about. The use of state-sponsored, state-sanctioned violence in order to enforce the position of those classified as white at the top of the social racial hierarchy and those defined as black at the bottom of it. Full stop. That's what it's about. But the problem is, if you start punishing those who white supremacy is supposed to be taking care of, well, they're going to start getting hesitant about it. Or at the very least, they're going to start arguing amongst themselves. Can't have that. So you got to sign on to the idea, the proposition that protection from law, immunity from law is absolute. And if somebody does a mass killing, well, we'll step in then because he's gone a tad too far. But up until that point, we're not really doing anything. You see, the white supremacists who run things, they understand the same chain of white privilege that allowed Ethan Couch to get a slap on the wrist for killing 4 people is the exact same chain of white privilege that allowed a judge to commit criminality in open court to let a murderer, Kyle Rittenhouse, go free, and which also kept Ethan Crumbley from being punished instead of waiting until after he commits a massacre to stop him. White privilege, white immunity from law is what they have to preserve. Sure, most of those classified as white may not go to the extent of an Ethan Couch or a Kyle Rittenhouse or an Ethan Crumbley, but they all see when these things happen. When Judge Aaron Persky in California allowed Brock Turner, the rapist, to walk out of court and didn't even punish the little maggot, you had a whole bunch of folks in the white media who made it a point they would start screaming, "Nothing you can do, nothing you can't do anything about it. You know, the judge's ruling is final, can't do anything about it." And they also made it a point to run articles when people started demonstrating and saying that Judge Persky needs to be recalled. Remember all those BS articles and headlines saying, if you recall Judge Persky, why, the judges are going to be afraid to give lighter sentences while they'll be locking everybody up and throwing away the key because they'll be terrified not to. So they're going to come down on everyone. You can't make it where the judges lock people up. Now, black folks have already been seeing these judges have been locking people up, giving people life sentences for nothing. You got 3 strikes. All these laws, many of them put on the books by Joe Biden, by the way, mandatory sentencing guidelines and such, all meant to make it where the judges don't have any leeway or any latitude when it comes to sentencing. They've already, especially with black people, been giving horrendously harsh sentences. So when the white media claims that, oh, you better not let this white man get punished for rape when he admitted to it, he's been caught doing it. Don't let him get punished for rape. He needs to walk free because if not, why, the judges, they'll be punishing people harshly. They've been already doing it. You can't threaten people with stuff you've been doing all along, but that's what the white media tried. Well, Judge Persky wound up getting thrown off the bench by the people, as he should. And what happened? Where are all of these harsh sentences? Where are all of these zero-tolerance judges? You sure as hell didn't have one in the Rittenhouse trial. Judge Schroeder, he became a blatant, open member of the defense team. He put his bias and prejudice on full display. He wanted everyone to know that he was going to do everything he could from the bench to make sure that a mass killer walked free. He wanted to make it very clear, I'm not punishing this guy for any reason. I don't care how many people he's killed. But I think the TBA made a very striking observation last night. If this Crumbley character decides to claim self-defense, that he was being bullied and he was scared for his safety and, oh, there were these other kids at school who were menacing him and he didn't know what to do, don't you know that he could actually give it a try? Don't you know that if he went to court and said that, well, all of a sudden, the white media would start feigning confusion? So, if that's the case, oh my gosh, we're not sure. If he actually tried that, he would actually have a good chance of it working. Yeah, the people who thought they were benefiting from white supremacy, trying to prop it up, they never expected that it might become a suicide pact at some point. Oh, and on a little side note, Ethan Crumbley's parents, they've got $500,000 bail, which means that all they actually have to come up with is $50,000 to get themselves out. So once again, just like we saw with that other Ethan, slaps on the wrist all around. Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, though it does tend to rhyme, and that's certainly been the case here. That's why we keep seeing the exact same circumstance playing themselves out over and over again, to the point now where the people doing it even have the same freaking names. That's how ridiculous it's gotten. And there's no sense sitting around hoping in vain that there's going to finally be some school massacre that will eventually prove to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is not about how many dead kids get carted out on gurneys. The whole gun control debate, especially with school shootings, that happens to be a subset of a far larger, much more important discussion about power. And the dominant society has already shown that when it comes to their power, especially the ability to use violence to control the society, well, they've already made up their minds on that score. And having to bury their kids occasionally, well, that's a small price to pay to be in charge and stay in charge. This is how a race war is conducted. It's been this way for 500 years, a 500-year-long race war to maintain white supremacy. And the reason that you don't see the white supremacists giving a rip about these kids who are getting killed, even though they're white, is because as far as they're concerned, it's a war to maintain white supremacy. So these dead white kids who are getting killed, who keep getting killed over and over again, the white supremacists don't look at them as being victims at all. They see them as being nothing more than collateral damage. Good evening, and be one. Black media only exists because of you. If you appreciate the kind of uncompromising commentary and insight that you receive in places like this, then be sure to visit the Cash App and also give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that.